Let the spring transfer portal madness begin. Let's talk about it on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, I want to talk about if Shawn Phillips is indeed an upgrade over Josh Gray or not, plus Luther Burden possibly going to the Kansas City Chiefs. What about the Buffalo Bills? I gotta be honest, that thought put a bit of a shiver up my spine. Going to talk about the future of the quarterback position a little bit more as well. But you know what? I do want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And as I alluded to there in the cold open, well, the spring portal window is open for the next 10 days here on the football side. Now, to be clear what that means here, that means that that's your window to enter the transfer portal officially. Now, for graduate transfers, if you already have a degree, for instance, you're coming back for that extra year, well, you can enter whenever you want, at least as far as I know. That was definitely, in the previous window, that was absolutely the case. I'm kind of hesitating a little bit here. Now, as I say that live, I want to say there was talk of cleaning that up a little bit, but I still think graduate transfers can enter. But regardless, anybody who enters the transfer portal over the next 10 days, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to decide where you're going within the next 10 days. So something to keep in mind there. This portal madness could stretch on for well beyond the next week and a half here, and almost certainly will. But one name who's entered the transfer portal, Eddie Kelly, who transferred from Georgia Tech last season. Kelly, I thought, was a pretty key member of the Missouri defensive line last season, made some key plays and some key moments. Unfortunately, his mother died very early in the season. Very sad news there for the young Mr. Kelly. And, well, it sounded like his teammates really rallied around him and all that stuff. It would have been, I don't know, just nice from a fan's perspective to see that young man stick around. On the other hand, I can see why, from his perspective, well, Eli Drinkwitz has been open about how the edge rusher position, defensive end, is about as deep of a spot as there is on the Missouri roster, so I can certainly understand why Kelly would want to seek maybe some more playing time elsewhere. I will just say this, in the short term, when you look at the ratings, you look at the ratings for not only college football, but, well, March Madness this past the NCAA tournament. Oh, do I have to bleep that out for the NCAA tournament here this past month? The ratings have been just great, really. They've been up year over year, that type of thing. So it seems like the constant movement, for as much consternation as you hear about it from various different fans, well, the ratings have been up, if anything. So short term doesn't seem like there's a real big problem here for either of the revenue sports. I will say, when I think about all of the guys bouncing around, stuff like that, a guy like Eddie Kelly you started to get to know a little bit and root for, well, when he's only here for just one season, and that type of experience gets more and more common, of course, as the years go along, you just wonder who's going to come back for the Lawrence Bowers, Damari Carroll alumni game, that type of thing in 20 years' time, even in a decade's time at this rate. When you bring out the guys who wave their hands, you know, between the first and second quarter and get an ovation from the crowd, who are those guys going to be if, well, everybody just sticks around for a year and they get their ovations at Indiana and Duke and, you know, Georgia Tech and all these different places as well? I just think it's going to be fascinating to see how the different dynamics of homecoming and alumni day and all that kind of stuff play out over the years. Well, like Josh Gray, the former Missouri center, who mysteriously entered the transfer portal, by the way, much like Joe Moore on the football side, who we all correctly, I believe, assumed are out of eligibility, but who the heck knows in 2025. But again, Shawn Phillips, now a transfer for Missouri from Arizona State. Well, like Josh Gray, he started his career at LSU, actually. And, well, talking about the new guy, Shawn Phillips from Missouri, his former player at the time, Bobby Hurley, the Sun Devils coach, called Phillips, quote, the most gifted front court guy that I've had. Now, important to note that this was before Bobby Hurley recruited Jaden Quainton successfully onto his roster. But Phillips, already obviously a good defender and shot blocker, certainly a really good shot blocker on paper, and even a better shot blocker on paper than Josh Gray. Also a guy, I think, a little bit more explosive athletically around the rim. So maybe while Phillips, similar to Gray, I don't think he's a guy you're going to throw the ball to in the low block or anything like that and expect to get efficient offense. But what I do think maybe you can expect is a little better finishing. That's all I'm hoping to see out of Phillips offensively. And if he's, well, as good of a rim protector as we're hoping, then I think Missouri's in pretty good shape here. I think he's at the very least a good option defensively for Missouri to have. And I would emphasize option because, well, since he isn't a floor spacer, never shot a three-pointer in his career that I've seen, and also, well, he's not much of an offensive option just in general, you do wonder if Dennis Gates, who is very much an offensive-oriented type of coach, you wonder how many minutes he'll actually get. Obviously, Gray's minutes fluctuated quite a bit in his short time with Missouri. Now, I have to say, I've seen some Missouri analysts say and assume that Phillips is a better defender than Josh Gray because of those shot blocking numbers. I have to say, I'm not ready to go that far at all. I'm not ready to make that statement whatsoever. Mostly, well, for a couple reasons. I'd say because I haven't had enough time to completely scout Shawn Phillips' game defensively, especially. But number two, Josh Gray was an excellent defensive player. He may not have been the greatest statistical shot blocker in the world, but believe me, at that size, he was definitely deterring people from the paint, a really good defensive rebounder. And I think just as importantly in modern basketball, a good pick-and-roll defender for his size, a guy who could really move his feet laterally and then recover back into the paint when necessary from the three-point line. A guy obviously with a lot of experience, a smart player defensively was Josh Gray in my opinion. So if indeed those Missouri analysts are right that, hey, if Phillips is a better defensive player than Josh Gray, well, then I really, really like this signing because for as much as I know a lot of Missouri fans got understandably frustrated with Josh Gray's offensive game at times, defensively, I think if anything, he was quite underrated. Now, for all the talk of Luther Burden III falling, his stock dropping out of the first round perhaps in the NFL draft, well, I'm a real big believer in Burden still, especially as all of you everydayers are well aware. But I do have to say this may be a little ironic here. If Burden falls to the Kansas City Chiefs, as much as part of me as a Missouri fan and a Kansas City fan is excited about the idea of Burden putting on a Kansas City uniform, I have to say I don't like the fit, and I think he'd be much more dangerous on other teams, including, well, one of Kansas City's biggest rivals over the past few seasons. So let's get to Luther Burden and also some Nico Iamaleava talk here in just a little bit. But first, the NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And I'll tell you this, I am staring at some stuff over at FanDuel regarding the NBA playoffs right now. Number one, Golden State won last night. That means they're facing Houston in the first round. Minus 188 favorites, I got to tell you, I think that's much more of a coin toss. So to me, plus 158, the Houston Rockets, I like it. The Warriors make it tough on themselves. They don't rebound. They turn the ball over too much. To me, a young, hungry Houston team has a real chance there. So I'm going to take the odds there at plus 158. But regardless of what you're thinking, don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. So this morning, a radio host in Buffalo who's actually about ready to take over the Locked On Bills podcast for us on the network reached out to me to do a segment about Luther Burden, and I think we're going to make that happen next week. But I have to say, when I realized, a Buffalo Bills-focused show is reaching out to me about Luther Burden, I have to say, as a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I got a little nervous because I think Luther Burden III would be a great fit for the Buffalo Bills. I think Burden, I'll get into a little bit more of detail why here in a second. I think he's being undervalued at this point. But again, for the Kansas City Chiefs, 31st overall. I like the value for Burden, 31st overall. I really don't like the fit, though. And it's pretty simple because Burden, I believe, in the NFL is going to have to be a slot receiver at his size, just like he was at the college level. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I think Burden has higher upside as a route runner in the NFL. I think he can expand his route tree much further than what you saw at Missouri. The problem is, from the Kansas City Chiefs perspective, I think what you have is already a bunch of guys who are maybe 5'10" to 6 feet tall at receiver. Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy especially, and one more player whose name, Hollywood Brown. There we go. Another relatively slight receiver. I think, if anything, if you're Missouri, you want somebody like Terriota, however you pronounce his name, the McMillan kid from Arizona, who is a much more big-bodied, go-up-and-get-it, ex-receiver type of player than is Luther Burden. But with Buffalo, especially with Josh Allen, his ability to make things happen outside the pocket, you give Luther Burden even more space to run around a little bit. One of the best after-the-catch guys in all of college football last year, one of the best tackle breakers the last couple seasons as well. A real weapon in the red zone. You just flip him the ball a lot of times. It's not necessarily always have to be a fade route. Certainly with Burden, you just get him the ball in his hands in the flat, and he can make amazing things happen sometimes. So again, if he's a Buffalo Bill, one of obviously Kansas City's biggest rivals here, that makes me worried. I think he's a great fit in Buffalo potentially. Kansas City, I just don't really see the fit, though. And a lot of fans, though, even some Missouri fans, are still holding some moments from this past season against Burden, in my opinion, including one fan who said, quote, "Never been impressed with Burden's dedication to the team or the other players. Cause many unneeded penalties and then pouted the rest of the game. Problem child attitude continues in the NFL." Well, I'll just say this, to the idea that he's never shown dedication to the team and other players, I'm just going to go ahead and trust Brady Cook's opinion more than I am fans who are watching from a distance, because Brady Cook has seemingly always gone out of his way to say good things about Luther Burden. And by the way, it goes the other way. Burden, the same thing about Brady Cook. And there's been, you could have taken moments where publicly Burden could have complained about the offense, this, that, or the other. I never really saw that. I just didn't. And, you could say, well, what are they going to say publicly? Well, they can say nothing, and they can do coach speak, player speak, all that kind of stuff. Again, to me, I thought both Burden and Cook kind of went out of their way to praise each other, and I just never really heard a lot of rumblings about, well, Burden doesn't work hard enough or he's a problem in the locker room. What I think a lot of people, including this commenter, are obviously referring to, I thought there were some ugly moments in this season. I was probably the most critical Missouri commentator out there on Luther Burden's body language in the Texas A&M game. I thought it was terrible. I thought it was something he needed to clean up big time, and I let him have it on the program. But I also said, hey, it's something he can learn from and get better at. Well, unfortunately, a couple games later, homecoming against Auburn, well, he had another blow-up, in my opinion, where he commits 2 straight personal foul penalties that put Missouri in a 2nd and 40 or something stupid like that. It was something completely insane, and what you saw is that Eli Drinkwitz, well, he corrected that behavior right in the moment. He did something he's never done before, which is, that I've ever seen anyway, which is publicly get in Luther Burden's face and basically say, what in the heck are you doing out there? That type of deal. Well, to me, from that moment on, I didn't really see any public, complaining, crybaby attitudes or personal fouls or anything like that. To me, obviously, those were regrettable moments. Those were bad moments for Burden. But the rest of the season, I didn't really see that stuff. If anything, I saw a guy who was still out there fighting hard for his teammates the rest of the regular season, and a guy when Missouri absolutely needed a catch at Columbia, South Carolina, a play that easily should have won the game had Missouri gotten a stop there defensively on that last possession for the Gamecocks. Nothing Burden can do about that. I mean, as clutch of a play as I've ever seen in Missouri history. That's just something Burden had done time and time again. And really, to the point on this whole attitude thing. Listen, we're talking about 21-year-old football players here. Many of these guys are not necessarily from the most desirable backgrounds of all time. Luther Burden from East St. Louis, Illinois, by the way. Not the greatest place in the world to grow up. And guess what? Even those of us who have the greatest upbringings, especially when we're 21-year-old young men, well, we don't always make the greatest choices. My point here is, and once again, take an example from the NFL this past season, the idea that, well, you can't have any problem attitudes in the NFL. A.J. Brown, the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver, during the playoffs, yes, the playoffs this past season, was caught passive-aggressively reading a book on the sidelines because that's how boring he thought the Eagles' passing offense was. Well, we all know what happened. Yes, Kansas City Chiefs fans, get ready for it. The Eagles beat the living hell out of the Kansas City Chiefs and then won the Super Bowl. So the point here is that, yes, even on great football teams, let's think back to the 1990s Dallas Cowboys, they did okay, despite the fact that they didn't exactly have a team of perfect behavior at all times. I don't think that's a realistic standard to have when you got a bunch of alpha male personalities running around in a locker room together. It's just never going to be perfect harmony and perfect behavior. I'm sorry, that's just not a realistic standard. But you know what? Again, the Eagles won anyway because A.J. Brown is a heck of a football player. And ultimately, well, while you don't want your wide receiver obviously showing up your quarterback, for example, well, it didn't hurt the Eagles in the long run. And Luther Burden, for as much as I didn't like his attitude on the sidelines, his body language on the sidelines, I certainly didn't like the 2 personal foul penalties against Auburn. Well, again, Missouri was able to overcome it against Auburn, and I thought the second half of the season, hey, Missouri got beat 34-0 the next week at Alabama. What was the problem there with Luther Burden? Was there a huge problem? Because that would have been a perfect moment to throw a bit of a temper tantrum. If anything, I thought we saw Burden maybe grow up a little bit. And we also saw him in a game that he sat out, obviously, the Music City Bowl, understandably, in my opinion. I guess maybe you could argue he should have played. I don't know that it would have made any difference on his draft stock. I really don't. But the bottom line here is he came. The teammates all seemed happy to see him. I just don't think that was fake. Maybe you do, but my contention is, listen, I'll take Luther Burden on my football team any day of the week. You know what? I think I'm going to push this Nico talk back to the next episode of Locked On Mizzou because we're running a little short on time here, and I still need to talk about a big-time quarterback visit for Missouri, allegedly happening, reportedly happening right now through Friday. Let's talk about Gavin Sidwar and the quarterback position for Missouri of the future after these quick words. And according to Sean Williams over at 24/7 Sports, Gavin Sidwar is visiting Missouri starting today through Friday. And his biggest, it seems as Missouri's biggest competition right now is from Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss Rebels. By the way, best wishes, thoughts, and prayers out to my guy, Stephen Willis, who, maybe going through a little bit of brain surgery as we speak. So I did a special episode of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, by the way, that's in the can. I'll let you know when that one comes out if you're interested. But again, just wanted to give some love and thoughts and prayers out to Stephen, who should be fine, by the way. I have no doubt whatsoever. But you never know, folks. As he said, you never want to leave things unsaid when you're in this type of situation. So much love out to Locked On Ole Miss's Stephen Willis. But, as I said here, Lane Kiffin, if he's in on Gavin Sidwar here, the 2026 high school quarterback, that's kind of good enough for me. That tells me that Missouri is probably smart to be on him as well. But here's the thing, as I've sort of been on here for the last couple weeks, I don't think Missouri absolutely has to take a 2026 quarterback here. Now, if they do sign Gavin Sidwar, I'll be happy about it. Again, good enough for Lane, good enough for me, but if Missouri does miss on Sidwar, if he does sign with Ole Miss or Iowa or whoever else, I'm kind of ready to move on from the position. I really am, because I just don't see any other prospects necessarily out there who are worth holding on to for the time it may take for them to develop, especially with Matt Zollers already in the fold. How many quarterbacks these days are going to be patient enough to wait around for 2 to 3 seasons to be a starter at this point? I just don't know how realistic that is. And I don't know that that's the best way to approach your career. If you have NFL type of ambitions or just ambitions to be a starter at a high major type of level, I don't know that that's the best way to go, is sitting on the bench for 2 years. I can make a pretty compelling argument that you're better off actually playing football at a lower level. So to me, Sidwar, a kid I would take if I'm Missouri. If Missouri gets left in the lurch at the quarterback position in this 26 class once again, as it has on seemingly a few different prospects here, I would probably just move on. I think it definitely helps Missouri that Sidwar is from the state of Pennsylvania, like Zollers as well. I believe they have at least a little bit of a relationship here, so that probably is a plus in Missouri's column. But again, if Missouri misses out here, I think they'd be better off using that roster spot, that scholarship, on a different position, one that can actually be helpful in 2025 or certainly 2026. And one quick listener question I did want to answer here just to close out the program. Everydayer Greg asks about the general manager position in general here that's becoming the new fad in college basketball. Basically, Greg says, hey, isn't that the athletic director's job? Well, Greg, thanks for the question and thanks for listening as always. I would just say not really. Certainly not for roster management. I would say that Laird Veach, for example, has a lot of different talents. Desiree Reed-Francois did as well. I don't know that either one of their strengths is going to be roster management and scouting, much more to the point. Are either one of them qualified, for example, especially you're talking both sports here, you're talking basketball and football, and all the other sports too? No, clearly I think it's pretty obvious to me that each one of these sports probably needs an additional person and probably a staff of people to figure out what in the heck is going on in college basketball and college football these days. Not just outside. We're not just talking high school recruiting here, obviously. We're talking about the entire country at this point. Whereas, obviously, Dennis Gates, Eli Drinkwitz, all these coaches, no matter who they are, they'll tell you they're very focused on their team and their opponents. Anything outside of that, there's just not a lot of time for that. Everything else is put into recruiting and, hopefully having some semblance of a life outside of coaching and sports. So, no, Greg, that really isn't the general manager's job. Really, being a general manager, roster management, scouting, that really doesn't have anything to do with being the athletic director. Their job is to, run the administration, hire coaches, and probably most importantly at this point, raise funds. That type of deal. Glad hand. Get donations. Get those donations up. That's the biggest job of the athletic director, and that's not a small job. It's a very important job, but it's a lot different than being a general manager of a team. But hey, thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou. Appreciate you making this show your first listen as per usual. For your second listen, check out Locked On the NFL Draft if you want to hear Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez, their takes about Armand Membouz looking like a top 10 pick. Luther Burden may or may not be in the first round. Well, find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts to be a smarter fan. So, until next time, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked On Mizzou.